All right, last question. Briefly explain why photographers must choose between depth of field and motion blur for moving objects. Well, if you are a photographer and you're taking a photo of something, there are generally two things that you pay the most attention to. That would be your aperture size and your shutter speed, the two that we just talked about. There's a third one, but that one's a little less important. So let's just focus on aperture size and shutter speed. And as you saw in the last question, if you reduce your aperture, this is good because it increases your depth of field, but it darkens your image. And then if you increase your shutter speed, that's good because it reduces motion blur, but it also darkens the image. So if you want both depth of field and motion blur, you're going to be darkening your image using both your shutter speed and your aperture. So you're just going to end up with a really dark image. So a lot of times these two things, the depth of field and the motion blur, come at a trade-off because you want to compensate for your exposure going down by kind of toggling your other settings. So say you increase your shutter speed, then you're going to want to also increase your aperture so that your image isn't too dark and you don't have motion blur. But then on the other side of the coin, you're going to have a smaller depth of field. Okay, so maybe this was a little confusing. I know there's a lot of terms that we just learned, but the TLDR is that if you want depth of field and motion blur, if you want a large depth of field, which is good, and no motion blur, which is good, you're going to have a dark image, which is bad. And so you can't have both.